He thought a single, brutal slap in open court would silence the black judge who dared to question him. He was wrong. What she did next, without raising her voice, ignited a firestorm that brought an entire corrupt department to its knees. The air in the Cinder Creek County Courthouse was stale with the scent of old paper and quiet desperation. It was a place of routine sorrows, but on this Tuesday afternoon, the routine was about to break. At 45, Federal Judge Evelyn Reed was a study in controlled force. Her presence wasn't loud, it was deep, like a river that looks calm on the surface but holds a powerful current beneath. Her hair was styled in immaculate locks, pulled back from a face that seemed carved from obsidian and patience. For 2 decades, she had navigated the labyrinth of the law, her mind a finely tuned instrument for detecting dissonance. That afternoon, the dissonance was a young patrol officer named Kyle Thorne. His jaw was tight, his posture a rigid display of authority that bordered on aggression. He stood before her bench, defending the arrest of a teenager on a charge of loitering with intent, a phrase so vague it was practically an invitation for abuse. Judge Reed leaned forward, her voice low and even. "Officer Thorne, the report states you observed the suspect for less than 90 seconds before making the arrest. Can you articulate the intent you witnessed in that time frame?" Thorne's eyes, pale blue and cold, narrowed. "He looked like he was up to no good, Your Honor." "Looked like is not a legal standard, officer. It's a feeling. The law requires facts." Her words were a calm statement, not a challenge, but in Thorne's world, a black woman in power questioning him was the ultimate challenge. He took a step closer to the bench, his voice dropping to a near inaudible sneer. "With all due respect, Judge, maybe you should stick to your paperwork and let us handle the streets." The disrespect was a physical thing, hanging in the air. The court stenographer's fingers froze. The prosecutor stared at his shoes. Judge Reed's expression didn't change. She simply held his gaze. "Your disrespect is noted, officer. As is your failure to answer the question." What happened next was a violation of every rule, written and unwritten. Thorne moved with shocking speed. He leaned over the bench, and his hand cracked across Judge Reed's face. The slap wasn't just a sound, it was an event. It echoed in the wood-paneled room, a sharp, ugly punctuation mark that shattered the courthouse's fragile peace. Silence. Absolute. A bailiff's hand went to his sidearm but didn't draw. Lawyers froze mid-sentence. In the back, a woman gasped, stifling it with her hand. But Judge Evelyn Reed did not flinch. She didn't recoil. She didn't raise a hand to her stinging cheek. She simply sat there, her back straight as a column of steel, her eyes locked on his. The pain was a distant hum, but her focus was absolute. In her gaze, there was no fear, no shock, no anger. There was only a terrifying, profound certainty. It was the look of a woman who had seen the monster, and was not, for 1 second, surprised by its bite. The silence stretched for 10, then 20 seconds. It was no longer an absence of sound, it was a presence, a heavy blanket of judgment pressing down on everyone, most of all on Kyle Thorne. He had expected tears or outrage. He got stillness. And in that stillness, his power crumbled into dust. In the third row, a young court clerk named Maya, her hands trembling, fumbled with her phone. She hadn't meant to record anything. Her finger had slipped. But her phone's microphone, sensitive and indiscriminate, had captured it all, 4 perfect, terrible seconds. The sharp, wet crack of the slap, followed by 3.2 seconds of the most profound silence she had ever heard. It was the sound of a system breaking. That evening, shaken and furious, Maya sent the audio file to her older brother, a student journalist at a local college. He posted it on a small, independent blog with a simple, stark headline, "The Sound of Cinder Creek Justice." He didn't add commentary. He didn't need to. The audio was a virus. It spread not through sight, but through sound, a uniquely intimate invasion. You didn't just hear the slap, you felt it. You didn't just hear the silence, you were plunged into it. Within hours, the hashtag began to trend, #HearTheSilence. It wasn't about the violence. It was about the response, or the lack of it. The world expected a scream, a cry for justice, a press conference. But from Judge Reed, there was nothing. Her official silence was a mirror to the silence on the recording, and it amplified the echo tenfold. People filled that void with their own interpretations. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, one tweet read, reposted thousands of times. That silence wasn't fear, wrote a prominent civil rights activist. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. Major news outlets picked up the story, but they were clumsy. They had no video, no photo, just a disembodied sound and a chorus of online outrage. They called it an alleged incident. They reported that Officer Thorne was on administrative leave pending investigation. The official language was a weak attempt to contain a fire that was already raging. But while the world debated her stillness, Judge Reed was moving. She ignored the calls from reporters, the concerned messages from colleagues, the firestorm brewing in her name. Her focus had narrowed to a single point, a case file that had landed on her desk a week earlier, the very case she had been questioning. It was a thin manila folder, almost empty, containing the life of a 16-year-old boy named Leo Cortez. She sat in her home office, the glow of her monitor illuminating the file's sparse contents. Arrested for loitering with intent. Arresting officer, Kyle Thorne. The name seemed to burn on the page. The world was focused on the slap she had received, but Judge Reed understood that the slap wasn't the disease. It was a symptom. The real disease was buried here, in the quiet, bureaucratic violence of a nearly empty folder. She knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the story wasn't about the sound the world had heard. It was about the boy no one had seen. The file on Leo Cortez was a masterpiece of administrative erasure. It was a ghost story told in bureaucratic ink. Judge Reed spread the documents across her desk, her trained eyes scanning for the tells, the small inconsistencies where the truth hides. She found them everywhere. The arrest report, filed by Officer Thorne, listed the location as the corner of 5th and Elm, directly in front of a shuttered auto parts store. The time was logged at 9:17 p.m. But the GPS data from Thorne's patrol car, which she had quietly requested through a trusted contact in the IT department, told a different story. At 9:17 p.m., his vehicle was over a mile away, parked near the entrance to a new, upscale condominium development. It was a 23-minute discrepancy, an eternity in the timeline of an arrest. Next, the body cam footage. The official response to her inquiry was a familiar, sterile phrase, "File corrupted during upload." It was the digital equivalent of a shrug, a dead end designed to exhaust inquiry. But Judge Reed had fought this ghost before. She knew corrupted was often code for concealed. She dug deeper, cross-referencing city traffic camera footage. At 9:17 p.m., the corner of 5th and Elm was empty. No patrol car. No officer. No teenage boy. The arrest hadn't just been misreported, it had been fabricated. It was a ghost arrest. The most damning piece was the parental notification log. Leo's parents, Spanish-speaking immigrants who worked night shifts at a food processing plant, weren't notified until 72 hours after the arrest. The log showed a single call, with a note, "No answer." There was no record of a follow-up, no home visit, no attempt to contact them at their workplaces. They had been systematically cut off from their own child. This wasn't just Thorne's sloppiness. This was a procedure. This was a system. She started pulling other files, cases handled by Thorne over the past year. A pattern emerged with chilling clarity. 14 arrests, all involving minority teenagers, all on vague charges like defiant trespass or failure to comply. All took place in neighborhoods slated for urban renewal. In 9 of those cases, the body cam footage was corrupted. In 12, there were significant discrepancies between the GPS data and the written reports. It was a quiet, efficient machine designed to sweep children off the streets and into the system, clearing the way for gentrification. The arrests weren't about crime, they were about real estate. The children weren't suspects, they were obstacles. And Officer Thorne wasn't just a rogue cop. He was a cog, a loyal and brutal component of a much larger apparatus. He was the hand, but someone else was the brain. Someone had designed the machine, oiled its gears, and kept it humming in the dark. Judge Reed closed her eyes, the pieces clicking into place. This went far beyond one violent officer. This was an architecture of injustice, and she was determined to find the architect. The moment Judge Reed began filing official requests for server logs and personnel files, the machine fought back. The open channels of communication snapped shut. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls were rerouted to voicemail. The system's immune response had kicked in, identifying her as a threat and isolating her with a wall of bureaucratic silence. The architect of this defense, she quickly discovered, was a man who operated from the shadows of respectability, Sheriff Dominic Valerius. Valerius was a pillar of the Cinder Creek community. 25 years on the force, a face that was perpetually calm, a voice that was always measured. He spoke of community policing and restorative justice at town halls, his presence a reassuring balm for the city's anxieties. He was untouchable, his reputation a fortress built of good press and political connections. Judge Reed knew that men like Valerius were the most dangerous. They didn't need to shout, they built the systems that made shouting unnecessary. His digital signature, though buried deep, was on every procedural change that had allowed the ghost arrests to flourish. He was the architect. But even the most perfect machine has parts that retain a memory of their purpose. As the official doors slammed shut, quiet, hidden ones began to creak open. The whispers started. The first came from a court clerk named Elena, a woman who had worked in the records room for 15 years. They met in a dimly lit corner of a 24-hour diner. Elena's hands trembled as she slid a thumb drive across the table. "They don't just lose files," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. "They reclassify them. Juvenile records, sensitive cases, they get moved to a legacy archive server. It's a digital graveyard. I saw them move the Cortez file. It was intentional." The second whisper came via an encrypted email from a sender identified only as B_tech. It was Ben, a junior IT technician who had been ordered to run a diagnostic on the body cam server the night of Thorne's incident. It wasn't a diagnostic, the message read. It was a targeted wipe. "I was told to delete all files associated with Thorne's unit from that evening. I couldn't. I made a backup copy first. They think it's gone, but it's not." Attached was a password-protected file. The final whisper was the most powerful. Dr. Sharma, a physician at a low-income community clinic, contacted her through a mutual acquaintance. For years, she had been treating teenagers from the juvenile detention center for unexplained injuries, bruised ribs, sprained wrists, what looked like friction burns. She was told not to document the source if the injuries occurred off-site. "But I kept my own records," she told Judge Reed, her voice a mixture of anger and shame. She opened a locked cabinet in her office and pulled out a thick binder filled with unofficial reports, photos, and handwritten notes. On a page dated 3 weeks prior, there was a photo of Leo Cortez's back, covered in a dark, sprawling bruise. The note beside it read, "Patient states he fell downstairs. No stairs in his cell block. Elena, Ben, and Dr. Sharma. A clerk, a tech, and a doctor." They were the machine's own antibodies, the quiet dissenters who had refused to fully surrender their conscience. They had seen the truth and, at great personal risk, had chosen to preserve it. Judge Reed now held the evidence, the server logs, the pristine body cam footage, the photographs of the bruises. She had the blueprints to the entire corrupt machine. The whispers from within the walls had become a roar. Judge Reed knew that taking her evidence to the traditional gatekeepers, the district attorney, the state investigators, the media, would be a mistake. The system was designed to investigate itself, a process that would bury the truth under months of delays, internal reviews, and carefully worded press releases. The machine would protect its architect, Dominic Valerius. So, she bypassed the machine entirely. Working with Ben, the IT whistleblower, and a small, trusted team of digital activists, she spent a week building her weapon. It wasn't a lawsuit or a press conference. It was a website. Stark, simple, and ruthlessly transparent, they called it the Cinder Creek Dossier. At 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night, with no announcement, the site went live. A link was sent from an anonymous email address to a handful of local journalists, activists, and community leaders. The homepage was a black screen with a single line of white text: "A system is not broken if it operates as designed. See for yourself." The dossier was an interactive, digital evidence locker. It was a masterclass in organized truth. It began with the 4-second audio of the slap, #HearTheSilence, now placed in its horrifying context. From there, users could explore the evidence themselves. One section was dedicated to Leo Cortez. Viewers could click to see Officer Thorne's falsified report side by side with the conflicting GPS data, laid out on an interactive map. They could watch the crystal-clear body cam footage Ben had saved, showing Thorne initiating the confrontation with the boy, who had simply been waiting for his sister. They could see Dr. Sharma's photograph of the bruises, next to the official medical intake form, which was marked, "No injuries noted." Another section, the Ghost Protocol, laid out the systemic pattern. It featured the 13 other cases, each a clickable portal into a story of erased evidence and fabricated charges. Users could see the metadata proving files were accessed and altered from IP addresses originating in the Sheriff's Department, many with Sheriff Valerius's own digital credentials attached. The final section was titled The Architect. It contained a timeline of Valerius's career, cross-referenced with the implementation of the very policies that enabled the abuse. It showed internal memos, signed by Valerius, authorizing proactive policing in high-value redevelopment zones. It included a damning audio clip from a department meeting, secretly recorded by another officer, where Valerius could be heard saying, "We need to make the street feel clean. Perception is reality. The paperwork will reflect our reality." The dossier didn't accuse, it revealed. It didn't tell, it showed. It handed the tools of investigation to the public, trusting them to connect the dots. It was a digital reckoning. The site's traffic was a slow burn, then an explosion. It was shared not by news anchors, but by teachers, students, parents, and pastors. People explored it in libraries, on lunch breaks, and late into the night. It was undeniable, irrefutable, and terrifyingly real. The machine had been turned inside out for the world to see. Judge Reed had not just exposed the architect, she had published his blueprints. The Cinder Creek dossier did not spark riots, it sparked a profound and terrifying clarity. The community's response was not a roar of anger, but a collective, determined hum of action. It began in the schools. Students organized silent listening protests, sitting in hallways between classes, all playing the 4-second audio clip from the dossier on a loop from their phones. The sound of that single slap, multiplied by hundreds, became an unnerving symphony of accountability that echoed through the city's institutions. Inspired, a group of local librarians, retired teachers, and student activists took over the basement of a long-shuttered public library. They cleaned out the dust, set up folding tables, and hung a handmade banner that read, "The Cinder Creek Transparency Project." It became a living, breathing archive, a physical counterpart to the digital dossier. People came not with picket signs, but with evidence. A former dispatcher brought in call logs she'd saved. A public defender shared stories of clients he'd been forced to advise to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. Parents of the unerased brought photos of their children, pinning them to a large corkboard titled, "Still Here." The pressure became unbearable. A special public hearing was convened by the city council. The room was packed, a standing room-only crowd of citizens, their faces a mixture of grief and resolve. Sheriff Dominic Valerius was called to testify. He walked in with his usual practiced calm, but the fortress of his reputation had been breached. Judge Reed was asked to speak. She walked to the podium, not as a judge, but as a citizen. She held up her phone and played the 4-second audio clip. The sharp crack of the slap filled the chamber. That, she said, her voice steady and clear, is the sound of a system doing exactly what its architect designed it to do. She looked directly at Valerius. You built a machine to erase children like Leo Cortez. But you made a critical error. You forgot that the people who run your machine, the clerks, the doctors, the techs, the teachers, have memories. You can't erase a soul. At that moment, a woman in the front row stood up. It was Leo Cortez's mother. Then another person stood, then 5, then 20. Soon, the entire public gallery was on its feet, a silent, standing testament to the truth that had been unearthed. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their presence was the verdict. In the weeks that followed, the system crumbled. Sheriff Valerius resigned, facing federal investigation. Officer Thorne was fired and indicted. A full-scale review of the juvenile justice system was launched. The Cinder Creek Transparency Project received city funding, becoming a permanent watchdog organization, ensuring that no child could be erased again. What happened in Cinder Creek is a lesson. It shows that true power isn't in the fist that strikes, but in the quiet, unyielding courage to preserve a memory. It proves that a single voice, amplified by truth, can dismantle an empire of silence. This story isn't just about them, it's about us. In your city, in your neighborhood, there are quiet injustices happening right now. It's time to listen for the silence. Subscribe for more stories that matter. Share this video to prove that memory is more powerful than redaction. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you saw someone stand up to a broken system. Please, comment with respect for everyone's experience. Let's start a new conversation. Let's be the ones who refuse to forget.